June 23, 1944. Mid-Atlantic Ocean, approximately 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Commander Uno Kameo stood in the cramped control room of I-52, a massive Japanese cargo submarine carrying 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin, and precious war materials bound for German-occupied France. Through his periscope, he watched the German U-530 slip away into the darkness after transferring radar equipment and 2 technicians. The rendezvous had gone smoothly. Soon, his submarine would surface for the night run toward Europe, moving at 15 knots under starless skies. Everything seemed perfect. Within 3 hours, Commander Kameo and his 94 crewmen would be dead, victims of a technology they didn't know existed. The I-52 was more than a cargo ship. It was Japan's lifeline to Germany, part of a secret Yanagi mission linking the Axis powers by sea. It was supposed to be untouchable, silent beneath the waves, protected by the vastness of the ocean. But somewhere above, in the night sky invisible to Kameo's eyes, an American carrier group listened not with sight, but with sound. They had unleashed something new. Air-dropped sonar buoys, floating ears scattered across the Atlantic, waiting to hear what human eyes could not see. To the Americans, it was a technological marvel. To the Japanese, it would be a death sentence. As the submarine rose toward the surface, the hum of its engines rippled through the water, bouncing off the buoys like whispers in a dark cave. In Washington, they called it Operation Barney. In the deep Atlantic, it would be remembered as the night the ocean began to belong to America. And down below, Commander Kameo still believed he was alone. The control room of the I-52 hummed with quiet discipline. Red lamps glowed dimly above the crew's focused faces as they moved between gauges, charts, and dials. Commander Uno Kameo, a seasoned submariner of the Imperial Japanese Navy, had spent 2 decades beneath the sea, but never had the ocean felt so uncertain, so unpredictable. This mission was different. The I-52 wasn't a war submarine built for attack. It was a lifeline. Japan was being strangled by the Allied blockade, and Germany, though battered, still had the technology Japan desperately needed. Advanced radar systems, Enigma communication codes, and jet engine prototypes. The exchange was simple. Gold and materials for innovation and hope. Kameo's submarine carried that hope. 2 tons of gold bars, stored beneath the crew's quarters, gleamed like silent witnesses to the desperation of an empire fighting for its survival. Alongside them, drums of tin, rubber, and molybdenum, all bound for occupied France, lined the narrow hull like metallic tombstones. The crew worked tirelessly. Every movement in the sub had to be precise. In these iron corridors, a single mistake could mean death. The men were disciplined but weary. The war had dragged on longer than any of them expected. Their last port, Singapore, already felt like a distant dream. The smell of tropical air replaced by the thick, recycled breath of metal and oil. Sonar clear, reported Ensign Nakata, pressing his headphones against his ears. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. They had heard whispers of American hunter-killer groups. Destroyers guided by aircraft using new forms of detection. Some said they could find a submarine by sound alone. Kameo dismissed it as propaganda. No machine can outsmart the sea, he had once said. But even he couldn't ignore the feeling that something invisible was out there. Up above, the ocean was deceptively calm. The I-52 would surface soon to recharge her batteries and make the night run toward France. The German technicians aboard, Miller and Weiss, discussed with the Japanese engineers the new radar sets they had brought. The equipment, they claimed, could detect enemy aircraft before they were even visible. To Kameo, it sounded like the future. A future Japan desperately needed. "Captain," Miller said in halting Japanese, "when this war ends, technology will decide who rules the seas." Kameo gave a small, polite nod. "Perhaps," he replied. "But the sea belongs to those who respect it." It was a statement of pride, the kind of pride born from centuries of naval tradition. But Muller only smiled faintly, knowing that respect alone could no longer command the tides. As the night deepened, the submarine began its ascent. Air hissed through the ballast tanks, and the massive hull creaked under shifting pressure. The sound reverberated through the steel like a deep, tired sigh. On the surface, the crew prepared to open the hatches. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before them, black, silent, and cold. The men climbed out into the night, the sea breeze brushing against faces that hadn't felt fresh air in days. Above, no stars, only a vast, empty darkness. Kameo raised his binoculars. "Nothing on the horizon," he said quietly. The path to France was clear. Below deck, Nakata listened again through the sonar. A faint echo pulsed back, rhythmic, distant, unlike any he'd heard before. He frowned. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't whale song either. Just a repeating ping that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He hesitated before reporting it. Perhaps interference, he muttered to himself, turning a dial to clear the signal. The sound vanished, or so he thought. Far above them, scattered across the Atlantic, small metallic cylinders bobbed silently in the waves. Listening. The I-52 was already in their net. By midnight, the I-52 was cruising on the surface, slicing through the dark Atlantic at a steady 15 knots. The engines throbbed beneath the steel floor, their vibrations echoing through every rivet and pipe. For the first time in days, the men allowed themselves to relax. Cigarettes glowed faintly in the night air as a few sailors huddled near the conning tower, whispering in low voices about home, wives, children, the cherry blossoms that would bloom again in Tokyo. Below deck, Ensign Nakata was still haunted by the strange ping he had heard earlier. He replayed it in his mind, that cold, measured sound, repeating at precise intervals. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. He wanted to tell Commander Kameo, but what would he say? That the ocean itself was speaking? In the navigation room, the German technician Mueller studied the radar readings. "Captain," he said, "I recommend we stay submerged during the day from now on. American planes are everywhere. They're hunting subs like wolves now." Kameo nodded. "Agreed. We'll dive at dawn. Tonight we move fast." But as the night deepened, the sound returned. Louder. Clearer. It was as if invisible fingers were tapping on the submarine's hull. Nakata finally reported it. "Sir, there's something in the water. A signal, consistent, patterned. Not sonar from a destroyer, it's different." Kameo leaned over his shoulder, listening through the headphones. The ping came again, sharp, metallic, followed by silence. Then another, exactly 5 seconds later. "A rhythm range?" Kameo asked. "Unknown, sir. It's coming from multiple directions." The captain's brow furrowed. Multiple sources? That was impossible. No destroyer could surround them without being detected. And yet, the sound seemed to come from all sides, bouncing between invisible walls of sound. Unbeknownst to them, hundreds of feet above the waves, a U.S. Navy TBM Avenger patrol bomber circled in the dark. The aircraft belonged to the escort carrier USS Bogue, part of a hunter-killer group patrolling the Atlantic. The pilot's radar picked up faint underwater echoes. "Contact confirmed, drop pattern Delta 3. The radio crackled. From the belly of the Avenger, a small metallic object tumbled into the sea. Another sonar buoy, joining dozens already floating nearby. Once it hit the water, it deployed its antenna and began transmitting sonar data back to the aircraft. Each buoy was a mechanical ear, listening for the faintest trace of submarine noise. The Americans had created an invisible web across the ocean, a network of listening posts that turned the sea into a battlefield of sound. On board the I-52, Nakata's headphones suddenly filled with overlapping pings. "Captain, they're everywhere now!" Kameo's pulse quickened. Evasive maneuvers. "Dive immediately!" The klaxon blared. "Dive! Dive!" Men rushed to their stations. Valves hissed, and the submarine's nose tilted downward. The sea swallowed the vessel whole as they slipped beneath the waves, leaving nothing but ripples on the surface. Inside, red lights flickered. Depth gauges spun. The air grew heavy and damp. At 100 meters, Kameo ordered engines to half speed. The sonar pings grew fainter but didn't vanish. They seemed to follow, shifting direction each time the submarine turned. "This can't be sonar from a ship," Miller said grimly. "They're triangulating us somehow." Kameo stared at the map, tracing their route. "If they know our position..." He didn't finish the sentence. Everyone knew what came next. Depth charges. Suddenly the sonar officer froze. "Sir, I hear propellers." Overhead, the Avenger lined up its run. The sonar buoys had done their job. The Americans knew exactly where I-52 was, the calm night. Above, the Atlantic shattered as the first explosion rocked the deep. The hunters had found their prey. The first explosion struck like a hammer blow from the heavens. The I-52 shuddered violently, throwing men from their stations. Lights flickered, dust and condensation rained from the pipes, and for a moment, no one breathed. Then came the second explosion, closer this time, deafening, the shockwave rattling every bolt in the hull. "Depth charges!" Someone shouted. "Damage report!" Commander Kameo barked, gripping the periscope handles to steady himself. "Minor leaks in compartments 3 and 5. Electrical stable," shouted the chief engineer. Above them, the American Avenger made another pass, guided precisely by the web of sonar buoys dotting the surface. Each buoy transmitted the echo of the submarine's propellers back to the aircraft. A deadly breadcrumb trail. The pilot adjusted course and armed the Mark 24 Fido torpedo. A new kind of weapon. One that didn't need to see its target. It only needed to hear it. Down below, the Japanese crew could hear the faint whine of the torpedo's propeller as it entered the water. "Sound contact," Nakata yelled. "Something's coming straight for us." "Engines full stop," Kameo ordered instantly. The submarine's propellers ceased, and the deep was swallowed by silence. Everyone froze. The sound of their own breathing filled the control room. The crew knew the torpedo was acoustic, drawn to noise. Any vibration, any sound would bring death. For 30 long seconds, the ocean was still. The torpedo's hum faded, searching blindly in the dark. Relief began to creep in. Maybe it had missed. Maybe the gods of the sea had spared them. Then the sound returned, louder. The torpedo had reacquired its target, hard to port. "Engines 1/4, Kameo shouted. The submarine groaned as it turned, diving deeper into the black abyss. Metal screamed as pressure built, gauges trembling at the limits of the hull. The crew could hear it now. The torpedo, circling, closing in. Brace for impact. The explosion tore through the aft section. The shockwave blasted through bulkheads, throwing men off their feet. The lights went out completely. Panic erupted. Water poured through a ruptured seam in the engine room, flooding fast. "Seal the compartment," cried the chief engineer. 2 men struggled to close the heavy steel door as their comrades screamed from the other side. Kameo turned away as the seal locked, their voices muffled, then silenced by the rising water. "Pump out the ballast tanks." "Bring us up!" Kameo shouted. He knew they couldn't outrun another attack underwater. Their only chance was to surface, to fight, or to surrender. The submarine angled upward, climbing desperately toward the surface. The air grew thin, acrid with smoke and oil. Men coughed, choking on fumes as they worked the pumps. At 50 meters, the sonar pinged again. Sharp, echoing through the dying vessel. "Another contact," Nakata whispered. His eyes glistened with terror. They know, on the surface, the Avenger's pilot locked in the new signal. "Target reacquired," he radioed, dropping second Fido. The ocean erupted once more. The I-52's hull split amidships, water flooding through ruptured steel like a living thing. Instruments burst from their casings, and the deck tilted violently. Kameo tried to steady himself, shouting orders no one could hear over the roaring sea. The last sound he registered wasn't the screams of his men. It was the steady, mechanical ping echoing through the deep, marking their final position. As the lights went out for good, he understood. This wasn't just a battle. This was the birth of a new kind of warfare. One fought not by sailors, but by machines that listened. And that night, the ocean, his ocean, had stopped belonging to Japan. When the explosion stopped, the sea returned to its haunting silence. Above the Atlantic, the waves rippled faintly, carrying oil, debris, and fragments of the I-52's shattered hull. 2 gold bars, once symbols of alliance and hope, now sank slowly into the abyss, vanishing into eternal darkness. Far below, in that steel coffin collapsing under pressure, Commander Kameo was still alive, for now. The emergency lights flickered dimly, casting ghostly reflections across the control room. Water seeped in through ruptured seams, hissing as it met hot machinery. The air reeked of oil and burning insulation. He tried to stand, but pain seared through his leg, broken. He could barely hear the surviving crew shouting through the chaos. Somewhere aft, the German technician Miller was still alive, his face pale and slick with blood. "Captain," he called out hoarsely, "it's over. We must abandon ship." But there was nowhere to go. They were 700 feet beneath the surface. Kameo looked around at his men, loyal, terrified, loyal still. They had been trained to die with honor, but this was something different. They hadn't faced an enemy they could see or fight. There were no destroyers above, no depth charge patterns to outmaneuver. Only invisible machines scattered across the ocean, listening to every heartbeat of their submarine. He slumped back against the periscope column, mind reeling. This wasn't a battle lost by courage or tactics. It was lost by progress. The Americans had turned the very elements of the sea against them. The ocean no longer offered concealment or sanctuary. It had become a map, one that the United States now controlled completely. A fragment of memory flickered through his mind. His conversation with Miller hours earlier. When this war ends, technology will decide who rules the seas. He had dismissed it with pride. Now it felt prophetic. Nakata crawled to his side, clutching his headphones, still miraculously working. "Captain," he whispered. "I can still hear them." "Hear what?" "The pings. They're still out there. Even now, it's like the sea is alive." Kameo strained to listen. Through the hull, faint but clear, came the rhythmic pulse, ping, Ping, ping. Each one a reminder that they were being watched, measured, catalogued. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, something broke inside him. The Japanese Empire had prided itself on mastery of the Pacific, the divine ocean, as their admirals once called it. But this sound, this cold, mechanical heartbeat told another story. The ocean didn't belong to the divine anymore. It belonged to the engineers, the scientists, the unseen men who could turn sound into sight. Around him, the last surviving crewmen gathered silently. There was no panic now, only acceptance. The I-52 was dying, and with it, a chapter of history was closing. Kameo reached for his logbook, the one that had recorded every dive, every bearing, every order given. With trembling hands, he opened it to a fresh page and began to write his final entry. June 23rd, 1944. The ocean speaks with the voice of our enemy. It hears us, hunts us, remembers us. The sea no longer belongs to men. He set down the pencil and looked around at his crew. Soaked, bloodied, silent. Men, he said softly, his voice steady despite the pain. The mission has ended. We fought well. They bowed their heads in unison. Some whispered prayers. Others stared blankly at the floor. As the submarine's lights dimmed for the final time, the faint pings continued, echoing through steel and salt water. Like a requiem played by the ocean itself. Above them, the U.S. Navy pilots marked the kill in their reports, unaware that in those final moments, the Japanese commander had understood something profound. The war for the seas was no longer about ships. It was about sound, and the world would never be the same again. Dawn broke over the Atlantic, painting the waves with faint streaks of silver. The sea looked peaceful, innocent, as if it hadn't swallowed an entire crew just hours ago. On the surface, bits of debris drifted aimlessly. A splintered plank, an oil drum, a lifebuoy marked I-52. The ocean kept its secrets well. High above, the TBM Avenger circled one last time. Inside, Lieutenant Commander Jesse Taylor stared down at the slick of oil spreading across the surface. The sonar returns had gone quiet, completely silent. He knew what that meant. The Japanese submarine was gone. Target neutralized, he reported calmly into his radio. No survivors. A pause. Then a voice crackled through the static. Copy that, Lieutenant. Good work. Return to Bogue. Taylor leaned back in his seat, removing his headset. He should have felt triumphant. The I-52 had been carrying vital materials, gold, tin, and technology that could have prolonged the war. Destroying it was a strategic victory, but as he looked down at the calm blue expanse, he felt something else. An unease that gnawed at him. The ocean looked no different than it had yesterday, but he knew it had changed forever. Those buoys, the ones bobbing quietly below him, were proof. The Americans had learned to listen to the sea. They no longer needed eyes or luck. They had science. Back aboard the USS Bogue, the crew celebrated the kill. Coffee was poured, hands were shaken, and victory photos were taken beside the sonar screens. But even among the laughter, some men stared at the endless water outside the portholes, wondering how something so vast could feel so small now. Mapped, measured, controlled, hell of a thing, said Ensign Robert Miles, the sonar operator. We heard them die before we ever saw them. Taylor didn't respond. He just nodded, quietly folding his flight log. The pings from the buoys still echoed faintly in his mind. Those sounds, sharp, clean, unrelenting, had led them straight to men who never even knew such devices existed. In the war rooms back in Washington, the reports arrived within days. The I-52 had been destroyed by an acoustic torpedo guided by Sonar Buoys. A perfect execution of a new kind of warfare. Admirals were pleased. Scientists celebrated. The victory marked a technological turning point. For centuries, navies had ruled the seas through might and maneuver. Now, dominance came from data. The Americans had harnessed the invisible. Radio waves, sound frequencies, magnetic pulses. What had once been the ocean's silence, its greatest defense, was now its weakness. In Tokyo, word of the I-52's disappearance reached the Imperial Navy with disbelief. They waited weeks for confirmation, clinging to hope that Kameo and his men had survived. But deep down, the admirals knew the truth. And somewhere, in the black silence of the deep, the I-52 rested, entombed forever in cold water, her gold still locked away in the cargo hold. Around her, the sonar buoy's signals continued to bounce off the seabed, echoing faintly across eternity. Those sounds didn't just mark a kill. They marked a shift. The ocean, once the last great wilderness of human warfare, now belonged to machines and men who could listen better than anyone else could see. Lieutenant Taylor wrote a final note in his flight report before handing it in. The enemy didn't even know we were there. The sea told us everything. He didn't know it yet, but this victory would define the future. The Sonar Buoys would evolve into underwater networks, the precursors to modern surveillance and anti-submarine grids. The world had entered a new era, one where silence was no longer safety, and the ocean itself had become America's domain. And beneath those calm waters, Commander Kameo's final words still rang true. The sea no longer belongs to men. The night sky above the mid-Atlantic glowed faintly with starlight, but beneath the waves, the real battle was unfolding. I-52, damaged and deaf to the enemy's intentions, crept westward through the abyss. Commander Uno Kameo's every instinct screamed for silence. The engines throbbed faintly, the crew barely breathed, and the air was thick with sweat and oil. He believed they had escaped the Americans' sonar net. But in truth, the U.S. Navy was just beginning to close in. From above, the USS Bogue's crew tracked the returning signal from their Sonar Buoys. The acoustic field had come alive once more, tiny ripples of noise traveling up from the deep, betraying the Japanese sub's presence. To the Americans, it was like watching a ghost move under glass. They could see what no sailor had seen before, an invisible enemy laid bare by technology. Lieutenant Commander William Bill Hall, aboard a TBM Avenger, leaned forward as the sonar technician relayed the latest contact. "She's still down there, sir. Speed 5 knots, bearing steady." Hall's jaw tightened. "Then let's finish this." Below, the I-52's hydrophone operator caught faint echoes, propellers thrumming, distant splashes. He reported to Kameo, who felt his stomach sink. The Americans shouldn't have known. He had changed depth, altered course, shut down auxiliary systems. Yet the sound of approaching aircraft grew louder. Something was hunting them with uncanny precision. "Prepare for emergency dive," he barked. The hull groaned as the submarine descended deeper. 150, 200, 230 meters. But the enemy followed like a shadow. Then came the sound, a hollow splash above. Another, and another. Commander Kameo didn't know it, but those were Sonar Buoys dropping from the TBMs above, each one extending a long hydrophone into the sea, forming a listening web around his position. The ocean itself had turned against him. In the American aircraft, the radar screen flickered with data from the buoys, each echo converging toward a single dark spot. The I-52. Hall's bombardier locked the coordinates. "Target in zone. Ready with Fido." The pilot banked hard, lining up for the drop. "Let's send her to the bottom." The Fido torpedo, a small, intelligent weapon, slipped into the sea with a hiss. Unlike conventional torpedoes, Fido could listen. It homed in on the sound of the submarine's propellers, weaving through the black water like a predator sniffing blood. Inside I-52, sonar men screamed as they heard the weapon's mechanical whine. "Incoming! Bearing 210!" Commander Kameo's face turned pale. "Hard to port. Full emergency speed." The submarine lurched, metal shrieking under pressure. Men clung to pipes and consoles as the Fido drew nearer, each second echoing like a countdown to death. And then, it hit. A thunderous detonation ripped through the aft section. Lights burst. Screams filled the compartment. Water rushed in like a living creature, crushing steel and bone. I-52's hull twisted, her bow rising in a final desperate arc. Commander Kameo shouted orders drowned by chaos. "Seal bulkheads! Surface the ship!" But it was already too late. In the American plane, the sonar screen lit with static. The unmistakable roar of imploding metal. The contact vanished. Silence returned. "Direct hit," said the sonar operator calmly. Hall exhaled, voice grim. "Mark the position." Another one down. Beneath them, the I-52 sank slowly into darkness, her gold, her cargo, and her men vanishing into the eternal black. The Atlantic swallowed her whole. But as the Bogue's aircraft circled above, no one realized what this moment truly meant. Not just a victory, but the dawn of a new era. The ocean, once ruled by stealth and luck, now belonged to sound, science, and signal. The Americans had claimed it, not by sheer might, but by knowing how to listen. And for the first time in history, the deep sea no longer belonged to the submariners. It belonged to the machines. By dawn on June 24, 1944, the Atlantic was eerily calm. The sea that had boiled with violence only hours before now looked untouched, its waves concealing the twisted wreck of the I-52, 8,500 feet below. On the surface, the U.S. escort carrier Bogue and her task group continued their patrol. But among the men aboard, there was a quiet awareness. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Lieutenant Commander William Hall stood in the dim ready room, reviewing the sonar tapes. The oscillograph displayed the last echoes from the Fido's run, the rising pitch, the sudden spike, then the silence. That final silence meant victory. But to Hall, it felt different. They hadn't just destroyed a submarine. They had destroyed an idea that the ocean could hide you. The Battle of the Atlantic had been defined by invisibility. For years, submarines had been the ghosts of war, unseen, unstoppable, feared. Yet in a single night, that illusion had crumbled. The Americans had used their new weapons, Sonar Buoys, radar, and acoustic torpedoes, to turn the ocean into something transparent. Every sound, every vibration, every breath of machinery now betrayed its maker. Commander Kameo and his crew never stood a chance. Aboard the Bogue, Captain A.B. Vossler received the after-action report. Confirmed sinking of Japanese submarine I-52, 15 degrees 16 N, 39 55 W. Contact lost after explosion at 23:40 hours. He read the line twice, then signed it, adding simply, "Enemy neutralized. No survivors expected." His officers celebrated quietly, knowing the significance. A Japanese-German alliance mission, carrying not only gold but the hope of a technology exchange, had been wiped out before it could even reach Europe. For the Allies, this was proof that control of the seas had shifted permanently. The age of sonar had begun. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Berlin, Japanese naval attaché Captain Uno Matsumoto waited for a message from I-52 that would never come. The German U-boat command sent what little they knew. The rendezvous with U-530 had succeeded, then radio silence. Rumors spread quickly. Some said the Americans had intercepted their codes. Others whispered about a magic weapon that hunted submarines by sound. Matsumoto dismissed it as propaganda, until a decrypted Allied broadcast confirmed it. Enemy submarines sunk by airdropped acoustic torpedo. He realized the truth. The oceans that had once favored the silent hunter now favored the listener. Deep beneath the surface, I-52 rested in darkness. The hull was split open near the engine room, gold ingots scattered like coins across the seafloor. A lifeless stillness hung over the wreck, broken only by the faint sway of currents. 95 souls, sealed in a steel coffin, forever lost to time. But their story didn't end there. For decades, I-52 remained a secret. A classified success for the U.S. Navy. The men who sank her received no public honors, and the mission's details were buried under layers of wartime secrecy. Only years later, in 1995, would explorers rediscover her, still holding her cargo of gold? Her instruments frozen in place, a haunting reminder of what had been lost, and what had been learned. For Commander Uno Kameo, there was no legacy, no gravesite, no letter home. His name vanished into war records, just another casualty of an empire's desperate final gamble. Yet in a way, his death marked something larger. The end of the submarine's reign of terror, and the dawn of technological warfare beneath the sea. The Americans hadn't just sunk a submarine. They had rewritten the rules of naval war, turning the ocean into their ally, their weapon, their domain. From that night forward, silence was no longer safety. It was a target, and the ocean, vast and eternal, would never be quiet again. In Tokyo, news of I-52's disappearance spread like a ripple through still water. At first, it was disbelief. How could a submarine designed to vanish be found and destroyed in the open Atlantic? Japanese Naval Command had counted on this mission as a symbol of resilience, proof that even as the war turned grim, the empire could still strike a deal with its distant ally, Germany. But the ocean had swallowed I-52 whole, and with it, the last real thread connecting the two Axis powers. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome read the final intelligence brief in silence. Across the map on his desk, red lines traced the submarine's last known course, ending abruptly west of Cape Verde. A note from Berlin claimed American aircraft had intercepted it. The admiral frowned. Intercepted? How? He muttered. Submarines didn't just get intercepted. They disappeared. They slipped away. That was their purpose. But the Americans had changed the rules. In the weeks that followed, Japanese analysts tried to piece together the mystery. Their radio intercepts recorded strange patterns, bursts of static, then long silences, as if the enemy had developed some new method of underwater communication. Some claimed the Americans had mastered underwater radar. Others believed it was witchcraft, a machine that listens to the sea. In truth, it wasn't magic. It was science. The U.S. Navy's Project Musical Chair had perfected the Sonar Buoy network, a system of floating ears that could hear submarines before they even saw the enemy. Combined with radar-equipped aircraft and acoustic torpedoes, the Americans had turned the ocean into one giant trap. Across the Pacific, Japanese submariners began to feel it. Missions that once relied on stealth ended in disaster. Crews spoke in whispers of phantom planes and silent hunters that appeared from nowhere. Every dive felt shorter, every patrol more dangerous. Men started to dread the hum of propellers above, the prelude to a rain of depth charges or worse. A phyto-torpedo that never missed. By late 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy realized a hard truth. They no longer owned the ocean. For the Americans, the I-52 was more than just a kill, it was validation. The combination of airborne sonar, radar, and encrypted communications had created a new kind of dominance. Admiral Ernest King called it acoustic supremacy. No longer did the U.S. Navy chase submarines blindly. They hunted them with mathematical precision. In Washington, reports from the Bogues operation circulated quietly through the Pentagon. Engineers at the Bureau of Ordnance pored over the results, fine-tuning sonar frequencies and torpedo sensitivity. "If we can hear them, we can kill them," one scientist remarked. And from that point on, hearing became believing. For men like Commander Hall, however, the triumph came with a shadow. In his post-mission log, he wrote, "We have mastered the art of sound, yet the sound of victory feels like silence." He knew what that meant. War beneath the waves was no longer a contest of courage or cunning. It was a science experiment. The enemy wasn't being outmaneuvered. He was being outlistened. In the years to come, as sonar evolved and nuclear submarines prowled the deep, the I-52's sinking would be remembered as the moment the sea itself chose a side. The old empires, Japan, Germany, had relied on invisibility and daring. The new empire, America, relied on information. And in that unseen battlefield beneath the waves, it was information that reigned supreme. Because from that night in 1944 onward, the ocean no longer belonged to men who sailed through it. It belonged to those who could hear it. Decades passed, and the Atlantic kept its secret. For 50 years, the I-52 lay entombed beneath 17,000 feet of black water, silent, untouched, forgotten. It wasn't until 1995 that an American expedition, armed with modern sonar, rediscovered her resting place. On their monitors appeared a ghostly image, a shattered hull, a collapsed conning tower, and the unmistakable glint of gold bars scattered across the seabed. The treasure that once promised alliance between empires now rested as tribute to the ocean's cold dominion. Inside the wreck, time had preserved everything. The instruments, the torpedo racks, even the crew's personal effects. It was as if the submarine had simply paused in motion, waiting to tell its story. But when explorers shone their lights into the command room, they found only silence. Commander Uno Kameo and his 94 men had vanished into legend. Sailors without graves, warriors consumed by the very sea they trusted. For historians, I-52 became more than just another wartime casualty. It marked the boundary between eras, the moment when warfare beneath the surface stopped being human and started being technological. The submarine, once a symbol of stealth and mastery, had been outmatched by the very forces it sought to defy: sound, signal, and science. Today the I-52 remains where it fell, an iron monument to ambition, sacrifice, and the birth of modern undersea warfare. Its legacy echoes in every sonar ping, every submarine patrol, every torpedo's mechanical hum. The men who died aboard believed they were invisible, but history would prove otherwise. In the end, it wasn't courage or secrecy that ruled the deep. It was the sound of the sea itself, whispering who truly owned it.